So whenever you're ready, I guess we'll
Okay,
kick it off.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Because I'm going to use the, and those of you who have seen me speak before, I don't project very well, so hopefully the microphone, it does sound like it's working. So, of course, we're going to start a little bit early, and who knows, maybe we'll get out a little early. This is, I hope that this particular topic is what we would consider very reflective. It's very personal. And I really would love to have your thoughts as we go through this, because I think that that's really how you're going to learn about this in the most effective way. Many people probably have heard of the concept of implicit bias, but it really requires a level of vulnerability to really understand how it expresses itself throughout the day for us, as well as how it impacts our organizations, agencies, and our community at large. I'm going to comment, someone in the back earlier spoke about trust between law enforcement and vulnerable communities. And this really is related very much to this topic. And again, it requires a level of vulnerability to be sincere with yourself about where you are. So we're not talking about any kind of isms. This is about, and again, we'll go through this as we go through, but it's really about a deeper knowing of yourself and where we get our information that creates these worldviews. So these are kind of our goals today, is we're going to be talking about the priming effect and how that affects the way that we see the world, the different types of biases that we have, how safety and trauma really impact the way that we see the world and impacts our decision making, how it impacts specifically with children, since that's why we're here today. If those of you who have not taken the implicit association test by Harvard, I would strongly encourage you to do that. We do have the link that is in here and the different ones that will kind of help that process. And things that you can do to kind of recognize those steps so that we can have those better, deeper conversations with our colleagues. So priming, basically, there are two different types of priming. And basically, it sets us up to think in a particular way. So we're either going to think more of something, positive, or we're going to think less of something, that would be the negative. Again, as a human, we are very manipulated by our mind, so the way that we see the truth is not always the truth. And that sometimes is a hard concept for us to get. So when we read this, right, go red, green, yellow, blue, orange, green, red, right, it's pretty easy to read. So I want you to read this. And what did you notice? I'm sorry? But when you first read green on the bottom, was that the first thing that popped in your head? Red. So this is a perfect example of priming, right? I trained you up at the top that the color and the word matched. I primed you to believe that. So when you saw the bottom row, immediately you saw the color and you thought, oh, that's red. That is a type of bias. So are you against words? Do you have issues with red? It's just what our brain does. The thing is our brains are lazy, and they want to act very quickly based on the information that we have. And so in this particular situation, this is really a great example of priming. And I hope it presents in a way that's probably the least amount of judgment associated with it. So I did want to talk about several different types of biases as well. So we're going to get deeper into implicit bias, but we have these other ones as well. So we have attentional bias. And my best example of attentional bias is that when you buy that car, and all of a sudden you see, wow, everyone else out in the world is driving the same kind of car. Never noticed this car before, because you're now more attuned to that. Now again, that's not a bias, right? Or it is a bias because your brain is gravitating towards that, but there's no negative or positive connotation to that. So when we understand that this is how the brain works, I hope we can be a little bit more open to those things that may make us feel a little bit more uncomfortable. The other one is a belief bias. Depends on who we're getting the information from, whether we believe it or not. Right? So if this is someone that I know lies all the time, I might struggle a little more about taking the information that they are giving me. Whereas if this is someone who is very honest, and I may not like what it is that they're saying because it really just does not fit, but because my history with them is believable, I am more likely to believe them. And the third one is confirmation bias, and this is one that I think is closest related to the issues related to safety, is that we seek out information to validate a worldview we already have. So if I believe that this particular area is an unsafe place, or that particular type of person is an unsafe person, I'm going to seek out evidence to validate my worldview. Now, one of the issues that we work with in our field is domestic violence. And so when you think of the perpetrator, who do you think of? It's always the man, right? But that is not the case. That is not always the case. And sometimes there are equality or violence that's actually occurring between both parents. And of course, from the child's perspective, both of those will make them feel unsafe. But that I have never had a staff member, we do in-home services, I've never had a staff member who was concerned when the woman was a perpetrator. But if the man was a perpetrator, immediately their ability to be able to go in the home is unsafe. And of course, one of the things that I say is, what is our goal as an organization that's going into homes? Our goal is to create safety for the child. So if you imagine, as the adult who is capable and competent, has a phone, has access to be able to, if you're afraid to be in that home, can you imagine what that child is experiencing? And what is our role to try to change that dynamic? Now, not that that's going to make you feel any better, but hopefully that creates a level of motivation of how can we be creative in ability to be able to meet your needs and to be able to serve the child. And it may not be in the home. Maybe there are other ways that we do that before we get into the home. But that we just don't say, nope, that's not an option. Or what I most often see is they never call the father. They never attempt to engage. They never try to open the perspective of maybe trying to do a different kind of intervention so that we can create a change for the child, because that's our goal. As we've learned about the adverse childhood experience, that as you continue those experiences, it impacts your DNA and your long-term health. And that's one of the things that we're trying to undo those factors. So recognize there are multiple types of biases. And that confirmation bias is probably the one that is probably the hardest to change. You can see when I think of in dealing with people who are depressed or have really low self-esteem, give 99 really awesome things happen to them, give them the one bad thing, and that is what they're going to focus on. Percentage-wise, it doesn't balance. Here's probably the one that most of you will be able to relate to is flying, right? The safest way to travel. Yet not that I've never had anyone that has had issues getting into a car, but the majority of people have no problem getting in the car, which is one of the unsafest way to travel. But boy, talk to someone whose first time they're getting on a plane and they're white-knuckled, they need their Xanax, they're trying to figure out, how am I going to make this work? And yet it is a very, very safe way to travel. That would be confirmation bias. So anyone who's ever heard me speak before, this is one of my favorite ways of helping people understand how we create our worldview as it relates to trauma. And I'm going to add a little thing at the end that's related to safety as it relates to bias. So I'm going to do my famous, we're at Publix, and you leave your wallet at the counter, right? You're walking away, and the bag boy goes, and he grabs you on the shoulder. So your activating event is someone has grabbed me on the shoulder. I have a worldview of that. My initial worldview could be someone wants my attention. So that creates a level of curiosity. That's the consequence, the emotional consequence. I have that emotional response. I'm curious, which causes me I need more information. When I'm curious, I'm looking for more information. Oh, look, there's a bag boy there. Do you need me? Yes. Oh, you left your wallet at the counter. Thank you very much. I carry on, and that's the end of the day. But what if I had a perception that when someone grabbed me on the shoulder, because I've got a previous history of being assaulted, or maybe I was assaulted in this particular store, or I'm in a community in which I already feel safe and now someone is touching me and I did not expect it, my immediate thought is I'm being attacked, right? And so what do? So my thought is I'm being attacked. My emotional response to that is typically fear. Now, some kids will tell me in the world that I work with is they're angry, but the reality is fear and anger are essentially the same thing. One is external, one is internal. Boys have a tendency to act externally. Girls have a tendency to respond internally. So most boys, not all boys, will turn around, right? I'm fearful or I'm mad because someone is touching me when they're not supposed to. I turn around, I haul off, and I hit the guy, and he is now laying unconscious on the floor with a wallet in his hand. Now, based on my worldview, which is that I was being attacked, I'm a hero, right? I now have attacked my perpetrator. I'm going to grab my wallet, and I'm going to walk away. What was the intent of the bag boy? Just to give you the wallet back. But I will never have that information. I've confirmed my worldview based on the evidence that I have, so the next time that someone grabs me on the shoulder, I'm even more likely to act in an aggressive way. And of course, that works the same way with the flight response. I run out, right? Someone grabs me on the shoulder, I feel like I'm being attacked, I get scared, I run out to my car, oh my gosh, my wallet is missing, and now I think I have been robbed. Now what would I do? Most people probably would call law enforcement. I call law enforcement, he sees that I'm distressed, he probably believes me, and then, but as a good law enforcement would do, he would then go and investigate. So he goes into the store, and he talks to the bag boy, and he's like, oh yeah, this guy was just in here, here's his wallet. But let's say I don't believe the police. What if I don't trust the information that he's giving me? Let's say I'm a minority, and the person who's in the store is of the same race as the law enforcement officer. I may think, he may be protecting the person in the store, and he doesn't believe me. It now validates my worldview, and this is what the young lady in the back was saying is, I don't trust law enforcement, and here's another example of how I don't trust them. And so how do we create a level of transparency so that we can begin to change those relationships, that we don't make those assumptions as we go along? And this is really where the priming comes in as a community, that we really have to be aware of. Where are we getting our information? What is the assumptions that are made based on the information that we're getting? So I kind of led this up that this is not an easy topic to talk about. It's not an easy thing to be this reflective and vulnerable with yourself, but that really is what I'm asking you to do. So so I kind of set you up, but we're going to get into some more thinking parts. This is essentially what implicit bias is. It refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So here's the difference, and this is where I think where we lose people is, just because I think one way does not mean that I act that way. But when we're talking about overall decisions, or when we're required to make assumptions based on information, this is where the unconscious is going to get you in trouble. And that's what we have to be most honest about. And I'm going to give you some examples as we go through this. So these biases, which encompass both positive and negative, right? So this is not, and that I think is one of the other stereotypes that have been promoted out there, that biases are bad. They're not. They can be good as well. You know, when he showed the little cheesecake there was a little bias, like, I should have had cheesecake. I did notice it was just 2 cookies in the thing today. I could have had more. I think last year we had homemade cookies, not Oreos, but I'm not reflecting on that. And that it's involuntary. It's an automatic response. Again, the goal of the brain is to keep us safe. And when we experience something that has made us unsafe, the brain is going to err on side of safety far more than anything else. And again, when we talk about priming and how we prime people to see people in our communities, that makes a difference. And that it resides in the unconscious. This is not something that you easily can access. This requires that level of vulnerability to be able to say, I never noticed that. Because when I showed you those color words before, I'm not sure you would have noticed that, wow, I got primed to believe that the word green that was in the color red was really green. Because our brains, again, are not set up that way. That's easy. And of course, there is that cultural element of political correctness, that we want to be nice to people, that we don't want to offend people. Again, there is not a direct correlation between an implicit bias and your actions. And you don't always know that you're doing it. That's what this last segment is you don't know that you're always doing it. And it takes much longer for you to be able to see those particular patterns. So it is a normal human experience. I cannot normalize this enough. There is no shame associated with the biases that we have. What I really truly encourage you to take the implicit bias test at the Harvard website. There are probably 20 different ones that you can take. I grew up in Martin County. Martin County is 93% white. And I was one of the majority. I know it might shock you that I'm white, but I do fall in that category. And in Martin County, our black communities are segregated. There is not much interaction. And I grew up in, we're talking about the 70s and 80s. Now it's 2016. It really has not changed terribly much. It's very similarly isolated as it was, 40 years ago, 35 years ago when I was in school. And so biases are not necessarily associated with your declared beliefs. I don't think that I'm a racist. I know that I actively try to do things so that I try to not make decisions based on race. But when I took the test, and I've taken it several times, I have a moderate degree of implicit bias against black people. So I make assumptions based on the race of the individuals unconsciously. So again, I know consciously I work very hard to not respond to that. But if I'm making a knee-jerk reaction, I'm going to go to my bias. And that's because of the environment that I've lived in and the information that I get from the media. And this is really we're going to get into that next, because that is the part that I hope that you begin to challenge the most, because I can tell you it has been an eye-opener for me, that when I became aware of those, and we're going to give some examples of how that, wow, did that not change the way that they wanted me? And I don't think that they were intentional. I don't think that there is a mass conspiracy to make me believe a particular way. I think it's the biases of the individual. That's their knee-jerk reaction. That's why they do that. But I think it's something that we need to be cognizant of. So here's our first example. So this is two photographs that occurred immediately after Katrina. So I'm going to read these to you. So the first one is a young black man carrying a trash bag full of stuff. It's pretty clear that he has been at the grocery store. It says a young man walks through chest-deep floodwaters after looting a grocery store in New Orleans on Tuesday, blah, 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 blah. Looting a grocery store. So keep that in mind. So then we look at, here's a young couple, a man and a woman, similar, right? He's got a backpack on, she's got a bag of groceries there. Two residents wade through chest-deep water, very similar, after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. Just finding it, they just happened to stumble across. Looting versus finding. Now, do I think that the AP guy is racist? No. I have no evidence at all but that is something that primed me to believe, because it's a young black man, it must have been criminal in nature. Whereas these people are survivors. They got to do what they need to do in order to be able to survive the world. So here's another one. So we have a picture here with the black man. It says a thug who kicked a woman cop, and basically what he did is he kicked a woman, and this is in the same paper on the same day. Okay? And I don't remember which order it was, but this one was first. The thug one was first, the second one was later. And then in this one it says, now the woman, the police officer that he kicked, she was injured, but he's a thug. The boy over here, teen in court charged with stab murder. Teen, not thug. Of course, then they're circled here so you can see the difference. But, again, a priming. Young black men are thugs, white boys are teens. I just read a study last week that, and I don't have this in the presentation, but it just kind of validates my worldview, that after school shootings, the incidence of people talking about how violent video games causes mass shootings go up 6,000%. Because surely we cannot believe that a white young man could go in and kill and that they're responsible for it. Surely there's something else that does that. But when we have a shooting of a black boy shoots someone, he's a criminal. That's accepted assumptions that we're going to make. And do I think that that's intentional? No. I do know after the last school shooting, there was a whole drama about violent video games, just so that you are aware. If there was a strong correlation, and there's lots of evidence that there is no correlation between violence and violent video games, South Korea would be by far the unsafest place in the world, because the number of violent video games and the number of hours that those young men watch is much more outweighs ours. And yet their violence rate is like a tenth of ours. So let's not be naive, because it does seem logical, but there is no evidence to support that. That's not why people do what they do. I love this slide. Because who's the felon? That's a great example of a bias. What gender do you think of? So again, there's no judgment here. It is what our brain automatically goes to. So these would be gender biases. So, the biases can really be related to lots of different things. It's not just related to race, but it's related to age, it's related to religion, it's related to obesity, it's related to gender, sexuality, a wide variety of things that we make assumptions based on particular stereotypes that we have. And remember, it keeps us safe. That's why we do that. So it's not a bad thing, but it does influence our decision making. So here's kind of a cute little thing, and I always love to hear the answers because people really get creative with this. So a father and son were involved in a car accident in which the father was killed and the son was seriously injured. The father was pronounced dead at the scene of the accident, and his body was taken to the local morgue. The son was taken by ambulance to a nearby hospital and was immediately wheeled into an emergency operating room. A surgeon was called. Upon arrival, seeing the patient, the attending surgeon exclaimed, "Oh my God, it's Mike's son." Who is the doctor? So people are much better about that. So it's a gay couple, and so it's the other husband, it's the grandfather. These are most of the things that I have heard. I think people are getting a little more clever because I probably primed you with the nurse and the plumber to think, okay, let's not be gender specific. But we will take the information we have and make it fit based on what our belief systems are. So if we're a little bit more curious about the information we have and make less assumptions, we'll do much better. So they are pervasive. I think I've given several different examples of how thoroughly they influence our decision making. When we talk about marketing at the grocery store, there is a reason why all the name brand products are at eye level, because those are the most expensive ones in the store. Those marketing people know what your biases are, and they know what particular colors, they know what particular sounds that you need in order to be able to act on it. That's why they say that if you're going to eat healthy, that you eat on the outside of the store as opposed to the inside, because they know how to market you guys, all of us. It's pervasive. And that the way that we've talked about how they are expressed differently, that they're not aligned with our belief systems, so there is not necessarily any judgment. So this particular concept is we do have a tendency to favor our own in-group. And what that means is that we have a tendency to connect with people who look, act, and believe the way that we do. It makes sense, right? Because from a trust level, from that safety level, people who look, act, and believe what we do are more predictable because we know our own behavior. Sorry, I keep doing that. Whereas someone who is different, or where we focus on our differences, and observable differences are the easiest things for us to be able to do. When I know that Israel and Palestine has had actually several different interventions in which they have tried to get, they have summer camps where they commingle Jewish kids and Palestinian kids together, because invariably we have a lot more in common than when we do when we just looked at ourselves. But we don't have a tendency to focus on that. We try to camp ourselves, tribe ourselves out so that it's us and them. And there's a degree of safety in that. So if we've got more of that trauma, we're more likely to be more tribal as it relates to that. But our biases are malleable. They will change. They can change over time based on the information that we get repeatedly over and over and over again. So they don't quickly change, but they can change over time. So I just want you to watch, when you're watching this video at the end, this particular little girl, I want you to watch what her response is, and we'll talk about that when we get back.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
Show me this kid.
I'm kidding.
This one.
That one?
I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
He's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
Every time I see that, it gets me, because knowing that she struggled with, I'm a nice girl, but I'm just telling you right now that I must be bad. So can you imagine the internalization of that particular shame that she experienced? I know you heard about that yesterday, but just think about what we do to people who are out of our in-group. Now, of course, not all the kids did that, right? There are some kids who did identify, so there are different factors that cause our biases, where we grow up, who our parents are, how they respond to that. But when we see a 4-year-old little girl who says, who am I? We have to do something as a community to be able to do this differently. And this is one of the reasons why we talk about this topic, because this is a community-wide topic. And I joke, and I don't want to go too political here, but the one thing I like about Donald Trump is he has brought race to the absolute forefront. That I have heard more honest conversations about race that I think can move us forward than, in my opinion, the destructive things that he has done with the way that he does that. Because those of us that are in the majority can actually have an honest conversation about these kinds of things. And then when we look at what happens with the police, law enforcement, and we can just go over and over of the many different things. For instance, the police officer who went in to she lived on, I think, at the 2nd floor, and she happened to go on the 3rd floor, and she went into the apartment because she thought it was hers, and then she saw this guy in her apartment. on the 3rd floor, even though she lived on the 2nd floor, and then she killed him, right? But she was a law enforcement officer, right? They treated it as an on-duty thing. And what was the first picture that they showed of that guy? Right? It was more of a it was a disparaging picture. And one of the very first things that I heard about him is they found marijuana in his. So clearly he deserved to die, right? Because he had marijuana. Now she was in his apartment. What they didn't tell you is they had a conflict between the two of them. Like she didn't notice when she walked in where you put your keys is not the same place. I mean, the whole thing was just unbelievable. But the media spun that initially until this was in Houston, and they had to pull in the Texas Rangers to do the investigation because they were actually treating this as a active, that she was on duty, an on-duty shooting, and she was not. That perpetuates that worldview that there is disparity between law enforcement and minority communities. That when we looked at Trayvon Martin, right, 17-year-old boy who was walking home with Skittles in his soda, and some grown man with a gun, and he is the victim. But that's what was perpetuated. And when he got off for what he did, and then a year later, right, he got arrested for domestic violence against his wife, just makes you wonder what decisions we made as a society on how we do that. Now we're moving in the right direction. We still have a long ways to go. But we're having franker conversations about that people of power can use their biases against them, and that we have to be open to that we can make wrong decisions based on that. Any thoughts? I would love to hear your thoughts about this video. Sad?
I think we have to start education in our community based on that. It's a terrible example that many of us didn't know that is happening, and we have to do something about it. We have to start now.
I will say, as a white male, the ignorance, and this, we were talking a little bit about that white privilege. We have it's not that it's white privilege. It's I get treated the way everyone should be treated. That's the difference. But you don't know it until you begin to have an awareness. And because my eyes have been opened, I am much better able to see the differences that occur in the way that people get treated. And the reality is, who's in power? It's white old men are in power. And so they just don't until they have a better awareness. That's why I love this video. Because anyone who has any degree of empathy to watch this little girl struggle about who she is, if that doesn't get you, I just don't know what will. And that we have to do something, yes.
Sure. How does that happen? Young children like that have such a negative view of themselves. They're raised most likely in a black family, a black community. How does that happen?
So when we see the video, when we see the TV thing, or the newspaper article of the thug versus the teen, when we see the looting versus the looking, that is in the media every single day. And children see the world through their parents' eyes. That is the way we know that to be fact. And so when there is that disturbance, we know that's how they're going to internalize. Yes.
Yes, and I think that's a good point that you made, that children, just like other individuals, are constantly getting messages through the media. I mean, it's out there. It's on TV. Yes, it's on TV.
You talk with your hands like I do.
Yes, it's on TV. It's in magazines. It's on various things that we see on social media. It's even in the messages in the home and outside of the home. Think about it. Even inside of some communities or some subcultures.
Out of the 21,
Can you give me the doll that looks like you?
Negative. Sometimes even color words are used within subcultures as derogatory. Even in
it's a white lie,
communities,
right?
Yeah, even in larger communities.
Just a little one.
When you have children and you're looking at who is pretty and who's not pretty. If you say to your child who's part of the majority culture, isn't this little girl pretty? Isn't this little boy pretty? But every little pretty child that you point out happens to be just like him or her, that is sending a message about beauty and what the standard is. So children are getting it from everywhere. And they're not only getting it from the larger culture as a whole, but they're also getting it from their families and their communities. So I would say that it's everywhere, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do our parts to make sure that we're trying to be aware of our own biases so that we're not passing them on to the next generation.
And the more we're aware of it, the more we talk about it, the less likely it has impact. Yeah, there's some back here.
Now, I have biracial children. My children are a mixture of black and white. And when my kids were growing up, my daughter would play with a white baby, whereas my niece, who is white, would play with a black baby. So it's a little iffy. But the thing that I did as a parent, and the thing that we need to teach parents and need, is that they need to boost their child's self-esteem and let them know that no matter what color they are, they're beautiful, and so is everybody else. So we as educators and as human and social service workers, you know, need to continue to work with the families and teach them how to build, you know, the building blocks so that our children don't carry on the biases that are you know, in the community.
Well, we're going to have biases. I mean, so we're not going to take that away. But and we will always have examples of where people will play with races of other dolls. My point of this is that generically speaking, when we look at the larger group, that this is the phenomenon that occurs. And you're absolutely right that as parents, the more we can create resilience and self-esteem in our children, the easier it is to rebuff. But what I'm asking is, what can we do as a community to be able to that? And the only solution I can think of is that we have to talk about it. Yes.
And I agree. I don't think it's still not being talked about. I remember growing up, we didn't talk about it. I remember dancing in the mirror with a towel on my head, wishing that I looked like those dolls and wishing that I looked like the white people on TV. But I broke the cycle in my family. I didn't even buy my daughters white dolls. Everything I introduced them to were African American because they needed to see things that looked like them and be proud of that and know that that was okay. But that did not, and both of my girls had the self-esteem, like you said, you know, and the pride and everything, but that did not stop them in elementary school when someone called them the N-word. And the teacher, what did the teacher do? Send a kid to the office? It's like they're like shocked. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. So it's just not dealt with. So I asked my daughter, well, what did your teacher say?
That's right.
And she's like, oh, she just told them don't do that. But you understand what I'm saying? So no matter how much we instill the pride, if the adults don't talk about it and say, pull the kid, say, Jim, you shouldn't say that word because A, B, C, D, or if there's no consequences for those actions, those biases are going to continue and continue and continue.
So I've worked a lot with biracial kids in my career. I work a lot with adopted kids. And one of the ways, and one of the very first things when I notice that the client is different than I am, it's one of the very first things that I will say to my client is, I know your experiences are different than mine. And please share with me what those experiences are. And specifically with biracial children, my history is, or what I have learned is, they are too white to be black and they're too black to be white. And when I say that, there's a level of understanding that they have, and it is amazing the stories that they will tell of the isolation and the seclusion that they get from both communities. But it never would have happened if I had not brought it up. Because we are so uncomfortable talking about race. And I talk about that one the most. And again, there are other biases out there, but that's probably the one that affects our community at the greatest level. And we won't change it as a social service worker until we begin to talk about it so that we can hear the worldview of the clients we have and how it impacts their day-to-day.
So yeah, I think this is one of, so optics matter, and this is one of the reasons why like the presidency of Barack Obama and like movies like Black Panther was so big, because it showed positive images that we've been basically fighting for years. There was a movie, Birth of a Nation, that came out years ago, W.D. Griffin, that showed, even though it was a white man dressed in blackface, but from that movie on, it showed like black men being terrorizing, the white woman, and we've been basically fighting that image for years. And filmmakers like Spike Lee, and Ava DuVernay, they've been coming out recently. I mean, it's been changing quite a bit lately. Positive images. I see, magazines, showing the positive images of black people. I mean, a lot has changed lately, but for years, I mean, going back years, the image of, the black man has been, I mean, it's been a struggle for a long, long time. Right now, like I said, it's getting a lot better, but, and this is, the result of that,
There was those of you that really want to go a deeper dive into this, the New York Times did a great series called 1619, which was the first year that slaves were brought to this country. There are about 10 different articles that they did, some really excellent, in-depth, and I have to say were really eye-opening for me. The very first article was a black journalist who talked about her father, who was a veteran, and despite the numerous explicitly racist things that occurred to him, how proud he was to be an American. And listening to that worldview was, again, from a white male perspective, was very different. Was there another comment? Yes. Thank you. Did you?
I immediately change the station, the radio station, when I hear the N-word being sung by a black man. Okay? All right? Why? Why are they, what makes that right? Why does that, they can do that. But it's supposed to be a bad thing, which it is a bad thing. We've made that a biased word. We've done that. We've used it in negative fashion, but it's a positive fashion to sing it.
Well, there's a great interview with Oprah and Jay-Z where they talk about that particular thing. It's an interesting perspective. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to that. Basically, Jay-Z's worldview is that it's a word that we want to reclaim. And whether it's right or not, I don't know, but it's a good conversation to have. Well, we don't want to pray. That's, yeah.
I respect everything that everybody is saying here. So I'm just going to give my point of view. It doesn't mean that I disagree with you. I'm going to go to the point where we started with how can a 4-year-old feel this way already. So I want to think that that 4-year-old has seen something that sent that message. And then the second thing that I want to think is that as a family, someone should take the role and have the conversation and educate. And I think that if we all do this, because see, if I do this, si ahora yo empiezo a hablar español, see, it's how we think. And if we're sending that message to our children, grandchildren, the community, we're at fault. And we're producing that.
And that's my point, is that we have to have that conversation, yes. Why don't we just do these last two, and then is there, yeah. Well, because we'll have more opportunities, so I had to.
In our fields and stuff, you know, when it comes to our children and stuff, it's all in our blueprint. It's all in my blueprint. So if we were to bring community into this, then during prenatal stages, with the GYNs and stuff, a lot of people go to parenting classes, be a part of that curriculum. When the kids start school, even as close as pre-K, as young as pre-K, have a curriculum, have that talk, have that unity in the schools, because that's what, they're at school 8 hours. They're with us maybe 3, 4, and depending on if you're case managers and stuff, there may be 1 hour a day and stuff that we're with them, and so, yeah, the influence is everywhere, but as a parent, if we make that blueprint for them, if we put Mozart music in our tummies and they are supposed to be brilliant, by the time they're born, then why not that? I've been very blessed with my girls, because that's the blueprint. But however, with curriculums and everything and bringing community, if we all come together, it takes a village, to make
And that's the goal, to move from that implicit to explicit. And I just want to comment about prenatally, and I don't have this slide in this presentation, but we have it in some of our others, that there was a study done, so those may be aware that black women have the highest rate of mortality than any other group as it relates to prenatal care. And one of the things that we have learned is that black women, when they sleep at night, their blood pressure does not drop down like it does for white women, right? Which is one of the things that impacts the baby, which is why they're more likely to have preterm labor. So there was a study that was done on African women that moved to this country. When they got pregnant, they were very much like white women. When they went to bed at night, their blood pressure rates dropped. But the next generation, 1 generation later, those children had exactly the same level of stress that all other black women did. So this is not about the slaves that came over, but it's about the way that our country treats, and it internalizes, because they came over as adults. The study that they did was all these African women came over after the age of 18. But we're raised in this country, the implicit nature that we give to black women is they always need to be on heightened alert. They're always on a fight-flight response, which is why their blood pressure cannot drop, which affects the health and well-being of the baby. And that's why they're much more likely to have a preterm baby. This is a very, very serious topic. And if we continue to minimize the impact that it has, which is why I wanted to show the 4-year-old video, or understanding the impact that it has on the baby, it's just not going to change. There was because you've had your hand raised a while, and then we'll move on.
One child told me, because I don't know how to bake, I couldn't make her a cake. She got so mad at me and told me to go back to my country. So how did she, a 7-year-old, girl, would tell me that she wasn't born like that? So I think it's so important to really, get educated about immigrants and the situation they are running away from in their country, coming here for opportunities, and a lot of us Latinos are being treated like this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is across the board. That whole illegal, even the word illegal is such a interesting word. I try to say things in a non-judgmental way, but just to kind of so these are some of the clarity of the difference between explicit and implicit. So, and the big one is one operates consciously. We make a conscious decision to be able to base our information on those, that bias, whereas the other one is completely unconscious. I think my next slide. So this is the implicit bias test that I was referring to. These are all the different ones. Probably takes about 10 minutes to do. And again, I think it's worthwhile to do. I know I was very shocked, and I could tell you I knew it while I was taking the test, what was happening. And it was very disturbing to me. I'm much more accepting of it at this point in time, but it was like, this can't be. This is not who I am. It was very shocking. But I think there are people, depending on where they've raised and how that has influenced them, they were even surprised themselves. So this is just kind of that whole circle as it relates to how we go about making decisions. So again, we have the media, we have all these representations that prime us to believe a particular way about particular groups of people. And really the group that probably gets more pigeonholed than any other group is the young black male. And that we have to be really cognizant of how we go about looking at young black males in our society and the differences that we do. There's a study that I'll do here in a minute that kind of validates that worldview. That's what creates our implicit biases. And for some, they actually begin to create those prejudices, and then they discriminate, and then we have that racial inequality. And we really struggle with the amount of racial inequality in our justice system. It is a significant issue. I was at a training about a year ago that was done by Juvenile Justice, and the county of Orlando, or the city of Orlando, Orange County, they have a diversion program. And what they were finding was about, in order to be in a diversion program, basically it's a misdemeanor. And when the law enforcement officer comes upon whatever this misdemeanor is, they make the decision about whether they want to divert this person into a diversion program or that they will prosecute them, forward it on to the state attorney's office. 95% of the white kids went into the diversion program. About 70% of the black kids went in. Same exact crime, and yet there was a dramatic difference in the number of kids that were going. And what ended up happening is the state attorney's office actually took action and said, we're no longer allowing law enforcement officers to make this decision, that it's based on the crime, and this is how we're going to prosecute it. And there's, he asked if the race of the cops, there are other studies that have done that, and this particular study, no, that was not identified, or at least it wasn't presented in the presentation. So I was mentioning about in the preschool world, we call it the big black boy. So this is Dr. Gillum. He is working diligently to try to look at what we call the baby to, or crib to, cradle to crib, cradle to prison, thank you, pipeline. Because we begin to prime our young boys at a very early age that they are delinquents. So in this particular study, what he did is that he put special glasses on them in which they could track their eye movement. And what he was told or the teachers were told, that there will be a disruptive student in your class. And what happened is that invariably, no matter the age or the race of the teacher, they were all women, but no matter the age or the race of the teacher, they predominantly looked at the big black boy in the classroom. So even if it was the white girl or the black girl or the white boy that was disruptive, the teacher invariably was looking at the boy to do it. So you can guess, from a confirmational bias point of view, if I'm spending 40% of my time looking at the black boy, then I'm more likely to find him to do something wrong, because most 3- and 4-year-old period do things wrong. So I'm going to find, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And what was really interesting behind the study is that even after he informed the teachers, they redid the test, and the same thing happened. It did not alter their behavior. Because I think it's so unconscious, it's really hard for us to do. It's something that you have to actively do over time in order to create change. But first we have to acknowledge that it exists. And there are some people in our communities that still struggle that there is not a disparity between two, right? Everyone has the same opportunities, and we know that not to be true. I don't have this in this presentation, but we have information about opportunities for AP classes. Then in our low-income schools, they have a lot less opportunities to be in AP classes than in our wealthier schools. And there's a direct correlation between the opportunity of being AP classes and the colleges that you go to. It is not equal opportunity. It is not done that way. But this is really a great study as it relates to race. There was another study that was very much related to this. And actually, I'll do this one because this kind of primes what I'm going to talk about. So basically, they asked 22 firms, and there were 60 partners in the firm. There's the breakdown. And they were provided a brief that an attorney wrote. They are identical briefs, but they were given two different bios of who, or it was the same bio, but two different names associated with it. One was black and one was white. And this is what they found. So again, look at the number of participants. This is 60 participants in this. In the brief that they had 22 errors. There were 7 spelling errors, 6 substantial errors, and 5 errors of facts and discussion and conclusions. Well, that must be legal terms because this is a legal study. And this is what they found when they knew that one was white and one was black. So he said about the white one, generally good writer but needs to work on. Has potential, good analytical skills, 2.9 out of 7 spelling and grammar errors. So when we look over the other, they had 5.8 out of 7 grammar errors. Twice the rate. Exactly the same document. Exactly the same document. The only thing that was different is that they knew that the person was black or white. Can't believe he went to NYU. So and these are, and do I think that these people are racist? No. Honestly, I don't. But I think that their biases influence the way that they were reading the brief. They make the assumption that a black individual is not as smart and therefore are going to make more errors and will be able to find those errors, confirmation bias. That we seek out evidence to support our worldview. And that's really, really hard for us to be able to know that what we see is not necessarily the truth. Because and again, these are exactly the same document. There was a study done on 2 different discipline referrals. One had a ethnically white name and one had an ethnically black name. And when they were the amount of consequence that was given to the student was dramatically different for the white kid versus the black kid. Now, in our community in Martin County, our rate of discipline on our minority kids up until last year was more than 3 times the rate, which put us under corrective action. We actually had to come up with a plan on how we were going to manage the disparity between our schools. We've made some improvement, but I think the last I looked, we're just under the bar that doesn't require a corrective action. It's a significant issue that and I have I believe inherently that based on these studies that I read over and over and over again, that when it's exactly the same phenomenon, because people will say, well, it's different, but the evidence does not support that. And that's why looking at this data really is quite helpful. And just the comments that are made. The technical errors, they were a little bit closer on, but the factual errors, 3.2 versus 4.9. 11 unsolicited comments versus 29. 3 times as much, practically. Here's the study that I was talking about. I did leave it in there. There is not equality. That's the point of this particular slide, is that we have yet to achieve equality in our communities. That what low-income kids, have access to versus other kids. That was one of the things that the law enforcement talked about earlier, that they actually have the ability to be able to put a law enforcement officer in every single classroom. In the more rural parts of our state, they don't have that option. That they had to, because by law they were required to have a law enforcement, they allowed their teachers to be able to carry guns. because they don't have access, because they don't have the funds. There is not equality. So we cannot, where you live really does matter. There's lots of study, there was a substantial study done on area code, that the area code you live on directly predicts the outcome of the rest of your life. And it's because of what you are exposed to and the opportunities that you have. There is not equality. So we definitely need to get that out of our head, that not everyone is given equal access. And it's not a matter of who your parents were, but it's what you have access in your community. Because when you do change it, it actually does produce a different outcome. Again, conversations that we need to have. And just because I'm a mental health professional, I'm going to go here as well, that in Martin County, they went from 11 law enforcement officers or 12 law enforcement officers, and they went up to 30. And I don't know how many psychologists they had, but they added 6 new mental health professionals. So 6 versus 20 or 17. What is it that we value? Right? We're going to value the law enforcement officer much more than we're going to value mental health. And if you have any interest in looking at the Nicholas Cruz situation, that was a mental health issue. That was not a safety issue. That was a misstep that we did as a society. I think I presented that here last year, the way we did that was a misstep. So we can arm people, we can continue to do that, but there will always be the Nicholas Cruzes of the world. And until we address that more effectively, it's not going to change. And I was at a listening session, where I'm supposed to be listening, and there was a student and it was with students, and she was expressing her frustration about the lack of mental health services for the students there at the school. And she's like, and the schools have gotten all this money for mental health, and yet we don't have any service. And I'm like, well, I said, I know this is supposed to be a list, but let me clarify, because the 6 new professionals that you got, they manage crises, and they're social workers. That's what they do. They don't do ongoing therapy. So there's a misnomer as far as the amount of money that we have provided on what it is that we say that's going to treat this issue. And I don't say that I have the answers. I'm not necessarily sure that more money is the way to do it. I think these kinds of things and having these kinds of conversations can have a tremendous impact, but we need to value mental health in a different way, I guess is what I'm saying. We don't have a problem. I was at a forum on Tuesday night, and the law enforcement officers there is maybe we should put mental health under police, because people will fund police, and maybe we'll have more mental health. It's like, that's an interesting concept. Maybe call it something different. I don't know. So these are just other types of biases, right? We have biases against religion, bias against athletes, the elderly, our veterans, that there are all different types of biases, assumptions that we make, and that the key to success is being curious. And that we can have an automatic assumption, but instead of acting on that automatic assumption, or acting on, I'm wondering why I'm making this decision, that when we can introspect it, we are more likely to be able to figure that out. Actually, I think so these are some things that we can do as a community, right? Continue to have these conversations with other people in your own sphere of influence. Encourage people to take the implicit bias test. And I will tell you, you will have people in your world who says that it's fake, that it's not accurate, it doesn't measure the right thing, it's not true. That's just someone you're going to have to work a little harder with. That we have to be introspective, right, and be curious. I cannot stress that enough, that when we're staffing cases that we bring up, what is the racial issue here? Is there a racial response that I got? As you can imagine, my head about blew off. And it's like, and interestingly, when they moved the kid back into the original place, his behavior settled down. But he manipulated that. That would be the worldview of some people. I don't know what their worldview was. But it's like, is he bad because he assaulted the teacher? or was he bad? And there's a long backstory as to what else was going on. But there's a reason why people do what they do. Behavior has meaning. That's one of my favorite things that I like to say is all behavior has meaning. There's a reason why we do what we do. There's a reason why I am in this profession and why I have these kinds of conversations. And that we are driven by those things, and those are important for us to know. That we need to have diversity in the groups that we work with and allow openness of those conversations. That is the only way that we're going to understand different worldviews. That if we don't have those conversations, if we don't have diversity in our workplace, then we're going to miss out on things that we just don't understand. And it's a hard conversation to bring up, but it has to be brought up. Let's talk about it. What are your racial experiences? Have you experienced any prejudice? What was that like for you? And when we do that, then it can open the world for those people who are not like those other people. And we all have them. Call out the racial disparity when you see it. Acknowledge that it exists. Evaluate the media messages. When does it come on TV? How do they show the picture? Example I used to give was there was a young man in Colorado who killed his wife and his 2 children. And when they would show his picture on the screen, it was all these lovely family photos together. He murdered his pregnant wife and his 2 children. At exactly the same time, there was a gentleman who his daughter had gone into a bathroom and she was raped. When she came out, she told her father, and he went in and assaulted the man who did it. He ended up dying. The picture they showed of him was his mugshot. Lovely family mugshot. Those are biases. Now, he was defending his daughter. Now, I'm not going to justify his behavior. What he did was not right. Right? That's why we have law enforcement. But boy, I can understand that reactivity. But they didn't show a lovely photo of him and his daughter. Right? That wasn't the family father of the year, as opposed to the guy who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. That's bias. And again, we are primed that information, and you probably can guess, I don't know if I said this, but he was white, and the gentleman who killed the daughter's rapist was black. Purposely engaged, so that's just calling it out when you see it, make sure that you, and I think that was the woman over here about using the N-word, that maybe that is something that needs to happen more often, that we don't perpetuate those kinds of things, and that we try to create some equitability between people. How do we create equal opportunities for everyone, and if they didn't have it, how do we catch them up? Because if not everyone has it, then it won't be there. This video is supposed to be, am I supposed to be done? Oh, 4:30. Well, we're probably not going to make it to 4:30, but can we go ahead and play this video, and then we'll summarize our conversation.
I was on I-20, and I got pulled over by a police officer, and I couldn't understand why, because I knew I wasn't speeding. I pull over immediately, and he pulls up behind me, and then he gets out the car, and he motions for me to get out of the car. And he's talking to me, and he said, "I just wanted to check on you because you were driving under the speed limit." And I kind of laughed, and I said I was going too slow. And he said, no, it's just that if drivers are really tired or if they're inebriated, they tend to drive slower. And I said, I just left the base 15 minutes ago. And I explained the situation, and he said, okay, that's great, and, thank you for your service. And he said, I was just checking on you. And as he said that, I just broke down crying, and I told him, I said, I was so scared. But the positive spin is that he really was just a nice officer checking to see if I was okay. But the sad piece is that I shouldn't have had to feel this scared. Anyway, I'm okay, and I'm getting ready to get back on the road.
So what was her bias? That all officers are bad. So again, that we need to be open on all spectrums about how do we create a more harmonious society. And that I will tell you, I've shown this video numerous times, and it's interesting to hear the change over time. That if you had asked a black individual, maybe not someone that lived in New York City, because I understand that the racial targeting in New York City has been occurring for probably since the 90s, and there was a bias that had already created. But outside of that, that's the only person I've ever heard that in the last 20 years that every time that they got pulled over by police, not that they got pulled over often, but that if they were very worried for their safety. But really, it's only been the last 10 years as the media has shown us, and not, again, I'm not disturbed by that because it's allowed for a conversation, but it's changed the way that the black community sees law enforcement at a much higher level. Before, and I would be interested in your worldview on, is there may have been a distrust, but you wouldn't necessarily think that you were going to be killed. And now, you're going to die. And so when we talk about the safety, did you want to comment? I just am curious of your opinion. Yeah. And how long, has it always been that way, or did you feel like it has changed over time? It has always been. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back for not just past 10, 15 years. This goes all the way back to 60, before that, you know what I mean? Roger King and race riots and all the different cities. So this has been going on for a long, long, long time.
Yes. And honestly, I don't know how we can have a better conversation with law enforcement so that they could hear this with an open heart, because my experience is they get defensive when these kinds of topics come up. I don't have the answer to that other than we as a community just need to be thoughtful of how can we do that? How do we give that opportunity to be able to happen? Because until we have the conversations, it's not going to change, yes, because of the confirmation bias. That's Yes. And there's actually data in New York City. One of the reasons why their crime rates went down so low is because they did much more community policing. And they mentioned that, our panel mentioned that earlier, that community policing is the way that we're going to create that change. And I also agree that having the law enforcement officers in the school, that probably will be an unintended consequence, that there will be some positivity as far as how they see some law enforcement officers. And I don't think we necessarily, did you want to make another?
Going back, talk to the conversation about the media, I think there's a lot of money to be made with the fear of black men and black girls. You know what I mean?
Well, this is what I say about the media is, what's the job of the media? Because it's not reporting the news, it's to make money. So that's why they try to do the catchy titles, they try to engage you, because when we converted our to the cable news, it really switched to, it was no longer about reporting news, it was now about how do we get people to watch. Did you're standing up, did you want to make a comment? Okay, yes. You had raised your hand earlier, that's why I thought, yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you for bringing it, because actually that's not my intent in the slightest. My intent is that how we absorb the information, because it's great to have a diversity of talking points, but how we observe it and how we can challenge what the intent of it is, what is it they're wanting me to believe, what is the information. When I look at articles, when I look at research articles, one of the first things that I do is who paid for it. Because I want to know what the bias is, and then I just take the information for what it is. It's going to probably influence me some, but not altogether. I did want to, just before, because I see people leaving. So my colleague is in the back, Crystal Morris, she does at Tykes and Teens with me, and she does trainings in our community. She specifically does this training a little bit differently. There's some different slides. But she can help facilitate those difficult conversations at your organization if this is something that you would like to happen there. There's some other things that she does as well, and this is one of those topics that I really I convinced Deb to let me do today, because I just knew that this is a difficult thing to do. And I'm glad that we've had, and really I've been very well received in the community. I think in general, I think Crystal has been as well, because people are open to doing things differently. We want our community to be a better community.
Well, and I think that, again, I apologize. Actually, Dean Barry said, I don't know, you might need to add another day. So we try to pack so much in, and, thankfully, because Dean Barry wants us to do more summits here, I think that there are more opportunities for us to be able to bring Jeff back to spend more time. And I think with these things that are coming up in the spring, again, not just locking into an hour. It could be an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. Whatever we need to deliver the message. And this, I think, is very important.
Just because I'm spontaneous, I might suggest that we have breakout sessions, because I think this kind of conversation might happen better with less people, because you're more likely to be vulnerable with less people in the room.
And again, this is something that we have not been able to do at the Child Summit, because again, we try to put as much as
Yes, you've done a great job. Everyone loves you.
Collaborators, the collaborator.
Okay, two more comments and we'll wrap it up. Go. Lockdowns. continue to have these conversations. That's what creates change. That's what creates change. Yes. I'm sure she'd come back if you asked her. Thank you. So that was an endorsement. If you want Crystal to come, and yes.
And she said, why? Have you committed a crime or something? And he said, no. But that was his worldview of where he was going to be. And this was in Fort Pierre. So we talk about the world influences, but we have work to do here in our neighborhood. How dare we not let that little boy know that, no, that's not your only option. That because his father was in jail, his stepdad was in jail, and I think a male cousin or a brother was in juvenile. He was the nicest young man, polite with good grades, but that's exactly where he saw himself. And he had never been to the beach. We talk about neighborhood and being shaped by your neighborhood. There's a whole world out there that he doesn't know exists. In his world, he sees himself in prison.
Yes.
And that's the saddest thing, and we can fix that here.
We can, and I see, so just to, because fortunately I am in this world, I see a lot of efforts of taking kids to college tours, that it's not just sports is their way out of poverty, but that there are lots of other ways as well. And it's about, I had a young man one of our questions is, have you been arrested? And his answer to me was, not yet. And I'm like, what do you mean not yet? He's like, well, everyone gets arrested at some point in time. I'm like, well, no, actually that's not true. So it was, but to challenge that worldview, is my responsibility. It's our responsibility. Yes. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and I may see you next year.